Okay, so 2 years ago I gave a talk on Cowboy 2. Cowboy 2 is still not released, but most of what I talked about 2 years ago is still true today. So this time I want to go over the process of making Cowboy 2, the lessons I learned, and then give a few interesting things. One question came very often yesterday and this morning, which is, when will you release Cowboy 2? So we will get to this. But first, a few confessions. So yes, Cowboy 2 came very slowly. There's a big reason for that. There's actually a few reasons, but there's one that is bigger than the others, which is that life happened. I became a father. And so I spent a lot of time doing something other than computers. Then there's the difficulties of working on an existing project, especially since I was not the happiest with the first version. I wanted to change a lot of things, and changing things takes time. You have to change the code, the tests, the documentation, and so on. So starting from scratch feels easy at first, but modifying is pretty difficult. And so there's a lot of changes. The biggest are in the core. So there's a new feature, the stream handlers, we will get to it, which change everything really. It gives a lot of power to users if they need it. And the interface also changed, but it's mostly when you convert from version 1 to 2, you have to delete a lot of code. That's about it. So it's mostly, it's been a lot of work on the core. I have also, so the first version of Cowboy had a lot of tests, but they were not very, I did not have a good method about them. It's basically someone report a bug, we write a test, and we fix it. In Cowboy 2, I will get to it, but I take the spec and write test. It takes a lot of time. And the documentation changed a lot. We will get to it also. And the final reason why it takes so long is that HTTP is already complicated, but HTTP2 even more so. So all these things took some time to figure out and to build. So let's take a look at the important lessons I learned when building Cowboy 2. First, there's something I want to call, it's a tentative name. It's active supervisors. So there's often this pattern when you write Erlang code. You have one process that tells another process to start a third process. That's your process telling the supervisor to start another process and to supervise it. So this is everywhere, and this doesn't fit well with what I was trying to build. So in HTTP2, for example, you have one connection and you have many streams which are request response on that connection. And so we need to handle them concurrently. So we have this process, the connection, that has to deal with many other processes. So the normal way to do it in Erlang is to have a supervisor that will then start them, but that's a lot more work. So instead of going in this direction, I did something completely different. So there's two solutions if you want to avoid this middle process that just starts and supervise. You can have what is basically a supervisor that can do also some other things. Or you can simply have a process that is mostly doing things, also supervise. So I will explain what I mean. So in Ranch, which is the code that takes care of the socket, the network below Cowboy, I want to move to, I didn't get there yet, but I want to move to a point where we have basically a supervisor process which at the same time as it manages the connection processes also accepts. So it's basically, we take the supervisor code, we add an info callback for accepting connections, and that's about it. So it's in theory very simple, but OTP doesn't allow this, so we have to build it ourselves. So this is something I want to do. I definitely don't have time to do it at this point, but whenever Ranch 2 will be released, it will come with this mechanism. And the other side is what I was talking about. So you have a connection that needs to start worker processes and needs to do it efficiently. So you have the connection process, the process that manages the connection also take care of supervising the children. And that's not actually too difficult because we are basically doing a simple one-for-one supervisor. So we just spawn the process and listen, monitor, and to see that the process eventually terminates. So it's not a lot of extra code, but yeah, it still needs to be written. And this changes everything because in Cowboy 1, we had direct access to the socket. So if Cowboy wasn't doing something you needed, or if we needed some info from the socket, we had it just there. In Cowboy 2, that's not the case anymore. Your code will run in a separate process. So at least at the time of the 2.0 release, there will probably be some things you can't do because we have to write the extra code to do socket operations like retrieving certificate with SSL and things like this. So it gets more complicated because of these extra processes. But we don't have a choice anyway with HTTP2. So the second thing I want to talk about is a list of commands. So it's something. Has anyone used EUC17 already? It's a new module in OTP. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so instead of having a tuple, when you return something from the callback, you return a tuple, and in previous OTP modules, you basically only say one thing. I move to this next event, for example. In EUC17, you can return not only that you move to another event, but you can say, I want to start this timeout, I want to put a message on top of the mailbox, things like this. So you have a list of things that you tell the behavior to do. So that's lists of commands. And that's something that I like very much, and that I use in the low-level side of Cowboy 2. So here you see a list of 3 commands, which mean I want to send response 100, which is an intermediate response with the headers I give. Flow is to tell Cowboy, okay, I want to read the body from this stream. And spawn means I started a PID, please supervise it. That's it. So these commands run one after the other, and that's how you can control Cowboy as you wish. So they are present in Cowboy 2, they are present in stream handlers, they are already there. We will come to them. And I also want to do something similar for WebSocket. So I won't do this before the 2.0 release, so the current interface will stay anyway for the version 2. But I want to add an alternative interface where you just return the list of command and state. So it would work mostly the same, but as the current interface, except currently we have we return a tuple, reply, a list of frames, and state. And I will just remove the reply and maybe add 1 or 2 more commands as needed. And this is necessary because something we need in RabbitMQ, which is WebSocket for MQTT over WebSocket or Stomp over WebSocket, is that we need to stop reading from the socket, basically manage how much the client sends us. So we stop reading from the socket, and this is something we can't do with Cowboy 1 and the current version of Cowboy 2. So these are commands that can be added later, stop reading temporarily from the socket. And this is the interface of stream handlers. So it looks perhaps a little complicated. So stream handlers are modules that are called every time there's an event related to a stream, so a request or response. And they are called with the ID of the stream and then the information about what happened. Init is when we receive the request, data when we receive the request body, info when we receive a message. You can send yourself things, or that's also where the communication between this and the process handling the request happens by default. Terminate, and early error is a little special. Early error is for all the requests that came in but had an issue before the entire request headers arrived. So that's why in early error you have partial rec instead of rec, because it may contain nothing, it may contain just the method and pass and so on. And so with this interface you can do a lot of things. We will come to it very soon. So the third pattern I have is callback chains. So there was already a kind of callback chains in Cowboy 1 with middlewares. They are modules, well, functions really, that are called one after another. And in Cowboy 2, stream handlers are also a sort of callback chain, and they work differently. So these are all the middlewares and stream handlers coming with Cowboy, but Cowboy Compress is not enabled by default. It's there, but you have to enable it yourself. Middlewares look like this. So basically we have an environment where we have some values that are defined when you start Cowboy, and we do something with this environment and with the request, and we modify the environment for the next middleware. So that's, for example, in the case of router plus handler, the router will add to the environment which module it needs to call with which state. And that's very simple. Stream handlers are very different. So to give you, to situate you, stream handlers are much lower in Cowboy they receive everything immediately. Middlewares are in the request process. So for example, you can do two things with stream handlers. You can here, so let me first explain. You have the Cowboy stream module, which is used to call the next stream handlers in the list. And so in this case, we start by calling the next handlers, then we get their results, and we do something with the results. So that's what the compress stream handler is doing. For example, with these results, it will check if it's a response that we got. If it's a response, it will decide if it needs to compress or not, and if it's the body, it will compress it or not. So you can modify what goes out of Cowboy. And similarly, you can also modify what goes in. So in this case, we first do something with the data we receive. We could decompress, for example, and then we forward it to all the handlers following. So this way of doing things is a little more complex because you have to keep track of the state of the next handler every time. But it's a lot more powerful. You can modify the behavior completely. And of course, you don't have to change anything. You can also, for example, implement access logs like this. You will receive all the events, so it's up to you to decide what to do. The fourth pattern is very common in Erlang, but yeah, I had no better way to name it. Receive loops are what they are. And in Cowboy, we have if you don't know receive loops, you probably know. But in Cowboy, we have the Cowboy loop module, which I want to make a lot more useful than it is today. Today, you can switch your handler to a Cowboy loop handler and have a receive loop for example, sending the body, streaming the body to the client. In Cowboy 2, I want to be able to switch from REST handlers to loop handlers. So currently, it's not possible anymore to stream the body using REST handlers with the normal interface. You can still do it manually. But in Cowboy 2, I want to give the possibility to switch from REST to Cowboy loop and just go from one to the other to stream the body. And the opposite is also true. I want to be able to read the body asynchronously. So this is something that won't be in Cowboy 2, but these are the things I look forward to doing. And yeah, server-sent events, it's something that is standard, well used. So why not have the loop handlers, well, at least have a function to format server-sent events. So now we get to the later aspects. So in Cowboy, I want errors that look like this everywhere. Okay, maybe not like this, like this. So this is tuple with 3 values. There's 2 values that tell the program what the problem is. So connection error means we will close the connection, we can't continue. It could be called fatal error, but that's the terminology of HTTP2. Protocol error is the type of error, so we know what to send to the client. And the last part is the most important, because when you have this, you look in the logs, you see the problem immediately. So that's very good for debugging, I think. And this I want to send, so in HTTP2 when you disconnect the client, you have to send a frame, go away. It's very nice. And you can put some debug information. So I want to have a debug mode which will send all this information. So this is something I started to do on all my projects. And I hope to see it more often in the future. Then we have maps which are really, really great, especially for options. So in Cowboy 2, I use map a lot. I switch most of everything to maps. So this is an example function that rebuilds the URI from the request. And you can provide an optional map which can contain any part of the URI. So if you specify, for example, a different path in the options, then when Cowboy rebuilds the URI, it will give you the same base of the URI plus the path you specified. So you can build a lot of links like this. And this function also is aware of different types of URIs. If you provide undefined for the host, for example, it will give you only a URI starting with a path. So it's very useful to build all kinds of different URIs. And this function, readBody, is similar. We provide the request and options. Options always have a default. So in this case, I think the default is to read for 5 seconds or 15 seconds maximum, and for 8 megabytes. No, 1 megabyte maximum. And it's the same. But I took this specific example because this interface changed a lot between Cowboy 1 and Cowboy 2. Today, readBody will always succeed unless there is a bug in Cowboy. Even if the socket doesn't send data fast enough, this function will return at least when the period is finished. It will return also, of course, if it received enough data, as much as it asked. And the timeout is there to make sure that if we don't actually receive the message containing the body in that time, we will crash. It's a safeguard. By default, it's the period plus 1 second. But normally, it will always return. And if you need to control the rate of the reading of the body, you have to do it separately. It's something you can't do anymore. And this is necessary because not only because we don't have the socket, but also because Cowboy 2 changed everything. So with Cowboy 2, if you have a lot of requests at the same time, you have to manage flow control to make the ones you want come in first, and that can get tricky. So instead, this should be a better start. And so these are specifications of maps, and there are no required values in Cowboy, but you don't forget you can write specs with the first symbol instead of the second if you require the value in the map. And so this syntax for the type of the maps is why we require OTP 19 in Cowboy. It's the only reason. I really wanted to make full use of dialyzer, so I bumped the version requirement. Next, better tests, or rather better way to find which test I need to write and to write them. So the goal of Cowboy is to basically implement all the relevant RFCs and other standards, but it's mostly RFCs. And also to implement everything in those RFCs. So for every part of the RFC that is, what's the word? Well, for every must and should, everything that we want to implement, must, we have to, should, we, it's up to the implementation, but Cowboy tends to be strict with its implementation. So we need at least one test for every sentence in the RFC that says you must do this. And that takes a lot of time because there's a lot of these sentences in RFCs. That's basically half of RFCs are like this, half explanations. So for example, the test suite for HTTP2 is now at more than 2,000 lines of code, and it's not even half yet. And some things you can't really test. You have to, sometimes you have some things you need to test manually, or sometimes you have some things that are difficult to test. They are edge cases that are difficult to trigger, for example. So in these cases, instead of writing a test, I write a big block of commands saying this part of the RFC section, something I could not implement because of this and that reason. And when you come back later, if there is a bug related, you can see that you did not forget it, and that's why you couldn't test it. Similarly, so that was one kind of test suite, the test for standards. The second kind of test suite is features, for example, the Cowboy rec module. So I have one test suite for the Cowboy rec module, one test suite for Cowboy loop, Cowboy static, and so on. And similarly, every combination we have of functions, options, and so on needs to be tested. So that's a little more difficult, especially for the functions that have a lot of options. But yeah, I try my best to cover everything. And so for this, everything is tested over HTTP1, HTTP2, TLS, with compression enabled, and so on. So when I write one test, it's run at least 8 times. I don't have many unit tests. It's useful sometimes when you write, for example, a parsing function for a header that is a little complicated, because it helps writing this function. But otherwise, I don't rely on them. I write features and standards test. I always run the test in parallel because that shows a lot of bugs. They are intermittent issues, and they usually don't show up if you run one test after another. They need to have some load in the system to appear. And when you run everything in parallel, you see them a lot more often, and a lot earlier than when you put in production and everything starts failing. I kind of go my own way. In this case, all my tests by default, and that's actually following an advice from Kostis Sagonas. I should not output expected errors. So when I test for errors, I silence them. there's a way to hook into common test to catch common test and error logger to catch the errors and ignore them if they were expected. So I try to do this, and so when you run the Cowboy test suites, at least for the parts that have been updated, you will not have any output except actual errors. So you can see immediately what went wrong. And finally, all the test case start with a function doc, which documents the case with all the relevant here. It's for the HTTP to RFC. So we have the correct location of what the test is about for reference. And this shows in the output from common test, both in the list and in the test case page. Better documentation also. So basically, I want Cowboy to have this amount of documentation. Okay, maybe not. But I want to have at least good documentation. And I went to take lessons from PHP, of all things. So I don't know if you followed the Erlang question mailing list, but there was a huge thread about documentation. And so I was talking in this thread about how PHP has a very good reference manual. And so I went and did what they were doing. What is this? So I have, okay. Okay, I can't click for some reason. Let's see. No, this one. So this is the documentation for the reference manual, and this is one function. So I basically follow what PHP did and adapted it to Erlang. So read body, we have the name. So the name is required only because I also generate man pages. But otherwise, we have a description with a spec, all the details about it, all the gotchas, the arguments one by one with full explanation, the return values, a changelog, which will be a little small for the time being, but if maintained, it can help when you move from one version to another. And examples, very important, and that's something I think is missed from a lot of documentation in Erlang. And finally, links to other relevant functions and modules. And in Cowboy 2, everything is documented like this. So for every module, every function of the module, you have a separate page with examples. Every function has at least one example and full description. And that takes a very long time to make. But it's done, yeah. So yeah, you can have, you can go to the website to get the documentation. You can read the source files. They are text files. It's very easy to read. You can generate man pages, install them on your system. It's up to you. So let's go to the most interesting part for many people, if the questions I had were accurate. So Cowboy 2 is actually almost finished. So my goal for the 2.0 is to stabilize the current interface. So there's a lot of things that I still want to add, but there's no point in waiting to add them. So it will be released this summer probably. I didn't put an exact date, but I'm pretty sure it will be released this summer, and at least the first release candidate will be soon after OTP20. Basically, I want to check that it still works. Even so, I run with the OTP20 release candidate already, but yeah, I just want to make sure it works, that it works with 19 and 20, and then we can make a release candidate. And yes, it requires 19 or above, and I'm terribly sorry about this. I receive a lot of tickets about my projects stopping to work with earlier versions. And there's only 2 tickets left for 2.0. One is very simple. I actually almost did it completely yesterday, which is to change multi-part headers to have a map instead of lists. It's the only part that wasn't converted to map yet. And the other part is constraints. So constraints are what you can use when, for example, in the routing, you match pass segment into a variable, and you can convert it on the fly. Make sure it's an integer, for example, and convert it. And the thing we need to do, well, we perhaps need to do for 2.0 is make sure we can convert that value back into, do the reverse operation. Because if we can do the reverse operation, we can do reverse routing, and that's something that a lot of people have been asking for. So what I want to do for 2.0, I'm not going to say reverse routing will work directly, but I want to do the changes that will enable reverse routing, because they are breaking changes. Cowboy has new users, RabbitMQ for maybe 1 year and a half. So I joined RabbitMQ part-time to help them with a lot of different things, and they wanted to move everything to my projects. So they did. It works very well. But they are on the first version for the moment. We will. It's mostly an issue with OTP version requirements. They have to support different versions than the ones I support, so it has to wait. Zotonic, which is in another room, is using Cowboy 2, and they make good use of stream handlers. I helped them a little with this, and the early error callback was implemented thanks to their feedback. So thank you, Zotonic. And Barrel, which is a database, no SQL database, which is from Benoit, who gave a talk yesterday. I work with him, with a customer. It works very well, and it uses Cowboy 2 already. And so yesterday I heard from a few people that they are using Cowboy 2 in production already. That's not a good idea, but it apparently works very well, so okay, no problem. What about, so yeah, there's Cowboy and there's everything I do alongside Cowboy. Ranch has a minor update that I released yesterday, which is when you start a listener, you have a value num acceptors, the number of acceptors, and there's a lot of confusion about this value, so I now hide it by default. The old functions are deprecated, they are still there, so nothing will break, but they are deprecated, and the documentation doesn't mention this anymore. Gun, which was created as a testing client for Cowboy, will get to the first stable version very soon. Similarly, it has been used in production by some companies for a long time. For example, Same Room, if you have heard of it, which are linking different instant messaging services together. and they use Gun for speaking to the different platforms. Cowlib is the library that contains all the parsing code that Cowboy uses. So all the headers, all the WebSocket parsing, cookies, and so on. It's going to be released as 2.0 at the same time as Cowboy, but probably won't be documented at all. So there's no public interface yet. My goal is to document everything because there's a lot of functions that are useful there, not only when you use Cowboy, but also when you write another project. Erlang MK, the build system, is going very well. It's been adopted by RabbitMQ before I arrived there, so I was quite pleased with their decision. It works very well. I fix things maybe once every 2 months. It's very slow development because simply there's very little issues with it nowadays. And finally, Looking Glass. So Looking Glass is a new project. I never spoke about it before, probably not even on Twitter. In the course of helping RabbitMQ, we needed a project to profile RabbitMQ as a whole. And we looked into the different profilers. So you have a lot of profilers that use the DBG interface for tracing, which are not very performant because DBG makes everything go through one process. And so that using this, you start the profile, the tracer on RabbitMQ. You start hammering RabbitMQ, and you see 100 requests per second. It's not very good instead of 50,000. So in OTP 19, Lucas added the Earl Tracer module, well, Earl Tracer NIF, which basically you implement functions in C that allow you to decide what you want to keep from the trace events and what to do with them. So you can send them to one process like the DBG interface is doing, or you can send them to a pool of processes and such. You can drop some if you don't need them and so on. So that's what we are doing with Looking Glass. And the idea is that we trace first, and then we profile the traces that we saved on disk. And so for saving on disk, we need to be as efficient as possible because it's a lot of events. RabbitMQ generates a lot of things. So we use LZ4. I had to write also an if for the LZ4 format. There was already one, but too low level for what we needed. And then when you profile, you get currently a cache grain file. So I should probably have taken a screenshot. I can show you if you want. And it's very, very fast. Instead of well, we can handle about 30% of the original requests when running on the same machine. So that's with all the writing on disk. When I didn't try it yet when running on a separate machine, when saving to file on separate machine, but I expect it to be much faster. So yeah, you can look into it. We just added the license and README files. You can use them. You can use it. And one last thing, this is important in the context of Cowboy 2 because Looking Glass can use a callback containing specifications for what you want to trace and which processes, which modules, which functions, and so on. And Cowboy 2, maybe not 2.0, but very soon it will come with these callbacks. So you can just use the Looking Glass, point it to the correct function to get the specifications, and then you will get all the traces for the Cowboy processes without having to look inside Cowboy itself. So of course there will be more versions of Cowboy, but we will stay on version 2 for, I think, a long time. Well, at least a year, maybe 2. No, but I am very happy with Cowboy 2, the way it turns out now. So I'm not looking into changing everything again. But there are some features cut that we need to add back. I want to add some more features like server-sent events. When I'm not happy with something, I will keep the backward compatibility for the moment. Like, for example, the changes I want to do in WebSocket, you will be able to keep the current code working until we release, until it's deprecated properly and removed, which will be in a long time. And yeah, so there will be, of course, Cowboy 3, but it won't be for quite a while. Don't worry. And so after I'm finished with Cowboy 2, I want to go back to the topic of REST. If you were in the talk about GraphQL yesterday, yeah, Jesper mentioned me. I'm a big fan of REST. I'm very sad that nobody is doing it properly, almost nobody. I know a couple, maybe 2 or 3 cases where they do REST properly, but yeah, outside the browser, I mean. And so I want to build a framework that allows you to have a proper REST API from Erlang without having to deal with the complexities of implementing REST properly. And this is exciting to me because then you don't need to update the clients once you are done. You just update the server to serve different things. And as long as the client knows what you are talking about, if you have a client for forums and it knows about posts, you can add information to the post and you don't have to change anything. And that's it. So one last comment. So I have been, in the past 2 years, I have lost almost all my sponsors due to various reasons, people changing jobs, companies stopping, pivoting, and so on. So I would like to try some crowdfunding. So if you go to my website, in the middle you will see 2 links. There's 2 ways to help me finance the work I do, which is either the usual crowdfund. You can give the equivalent of a beer every month, for example. I don't drink, so I can use this money for better things. Or you can buy the book I'm currently writing, which covers a lot of tips about writing Erlang projects. So thank you in advance, and if you have any questions, please ask.
There is a lunch break, but I think we can have some questions. Unless you are hungry.
I never have questions.
Yeah, crystal clear.
Yeah, like you're saying, you're going to use the thing in gen_state_m where you put actions back into the loop. Will that not make it difficult to test certain things?
No, I will not. They are not the same commands. We won't have the command where we put actions back in the mailbox, if that's what you mean. This no, they are commands related specifically to HTTP, so sending a response, sending, streaming the body, asking for more body, and so on. You can also upgrade to a new protocol. You can do anything you need. But yeah, strictly HTTP and a little supervision with spawning processes.
Any other question?
Yeah.
Do you already have any performance benchmarks?
I have absolutely not looked at the performance yet. Someone did, and apparently it's the same performance as far as the, well, for HTTP1, it's the same performance as far as stream handlers are concerned, but there's a little extra latency when you go from one process to another. This I'm not sure I can do a lot about it, because the future is not HTTP1, it's HTTP2, so we have to have an architecture that can deal with HTTP2. So HTTP1 will take a hit in performance necessarily.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.